Okay, welcome to the Business Blox Podcast. I'm Chris Manser.
I'm Dale Kitchen. Welcome again, Chris.
And good to see the pubs are reopened as we're recording.
It is good, but the pubs aren't actually reopened, just the restaurants.
Okay.
So you can't go in and have a beer yet. They're holding back from you.
You got to have a pot and palmer.
Yes, and then they move you on very quickly. So I was in coffee shop this morning, and they had like 4 tables set up, which is a very sad sight. So it's getting there, but nobody's making money.
God, that must be tough. 4 tables, and what? If you're only having a coffee and a bit of toast, that's not bringing in many dollars.
No, they're not paying the rent. So, yeah, which we'll get into soon. There's a lot of money being kicked around, but it seems like it's being put in the wrong areas. So, but we'll get into that.
Okay. And what's the latest with JobKeeper? I saw it's closed off now.
Yes, so the enrolments have closed off, but you've got to make your second nomination, meaning you've got to go into the portal and reconfirm your payroll details and your income details. The only sort of issues that we've seen is people who have entered their wages information through the single touch payroll system need to wait 1 or 2 days before the employees update in the ATO details because it's automatically linked. So let's say I have an additional employee in my final week of May. If I lodge my payroll and submit that to the ATO, it takes a couple of days for the system to update. Other than that, confirmations have all gone through. Payments should start to roll. It's really sort of getting, it's sort of the hard part of that's out of the way.
Okay, so that's just a month-by-month declaration now, and what do you have, 2 weeks at the start of each month to get in your figures, and get in your employees, getting your income?
Did they shut it down to a certain number? Because they extended the last one. I know that originally it was an 8-day period, but then they extended it. So you may have until the end of this month. I'm not 100% sure, but I know you did on the last one. So you could basically go up to the end. But as we were talking about before, there were people who had issues where the system was down for maintenance over the weekend. So last-minute registrations couldn't get in. So, you'd probably leave it for a week or 2, but I wouldn't, because there's always something that can pop up.
Okay. And also you do need to maintain paying your employees in the adequate time as well. I think they recommend to pay employees within 3 or 4 days after the fortnight or the weekly pay run finishing.
Yeah. We've had a few clients asking about whether they can still receive JobKeeper now that their income is starting to return. So a bunch of people are now making the same, if not more money than they were making before. They're still eligible. There's no opt-out clause that's been brought in at the moment. So as long as you're paying your staff the $1,500 that you were paying previously, $1,500 per fortnight, you are still eligible. You can still collect the money. Anyone who is collecting the money, I would suggest save it for the next sort of month or 2 and just sort of see where the economy sort of starts to pan out.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good idea that, if your business is picking up, it's obviously not going to be the same as it was 3 months ago. So I think having the JobKeeper for another 3 months will certainly help you. And if you can save some of that cash where possible.
Well, they I don't know how reliable this study is, but there was a study done on the effect of the $10,000 withdrawal from the super and where people spent that money. And it had the effect that there was a significant increase in the amount that people spent in the preceding weeks after they received their $10,000 amount. I think it was close to 1.6 million people pulled money out of super. So that works out to $1.6 billion. The problem with the system was a lot of that money was spent on, so they say a lot, it was just spent on non-essential spending, such as, they did say 7% was spent on gambling, a certain percentage was spent on beer and furniture. It just seems that people were just grabbing the money for the sake of grabbing the money. Good thing or a bad thing? I don't think it's good for people's long-term, so their long-term financial position. I think we're seeing a lot of the positive effects of that now in the economy. So we're seeing the JobKeeper money flowing around the economy, the $10,000 grants flowing around the economy, all the other money that's being thrown at people by the government. So I know people are feeling comfortable now, and some people are saying maybe I should cancel the JobKeeper, but just hold on to it. Even though the government's not doing great fiscal policy in putting the money when it should be used, hold on to the money and start spending it once the economy starts to take a bit of a downturn. And that way, you can try and soften the blow of the shrinking economy.
Yes, exactly. And what government would have surely put into thinking that a percentage would be used for non-essential items? Like that's surely factored in. They strongly argued against it, but that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think it was a case of getting as much stimulus into the economy as possible. Where it went, they didn't seem too concerned with. I still believe there was a major overreaction. That the $10,000 in itself may have even been just enough to keep the economy ticking over. That, coupled with state grants, coupled with tax credits, coupled with the JobKeeper, for a lot of businesses who had, a 30% downturn with a sort of an increase back to normal numbers now is a major overreaction. If I was a restaurant, I would need that money. So I think it should have been a lot more targeted. How that affects the economy, yeah, I think the budget is going to take a huge hit, and then that's going to come out in a reduced spending or increased taxes in the long term. And was it worth it for a bit of for a new couch and a couple more beers?
Yeah. Yeah, but at the same token, potentially people have the opportunity to rid credit card debt and car loans and get in a better
very
financial
small percentage.
Positions. But yeah,
so
we know.
I think where they went with it is they said there was about 10% of people. Hang on, I'll just have a quick look. So 10% of the money actually went to reducing debt, which is not a great. It's not a great. So 40%. And so 40% of the people who withdrew the money also didn't see a drop in their income at all. So it was really just people who didn't need it. So out of the 1.8 million, 900,000 really didn't need it but pulled it out anyway. 64% had gone on discretionary goods such as furniture and alcohol. 11% had gone on gambling. They did mention the debt pay down. It was a small, roughly about 10%, something around there. So not a great use of money. TomWaterhouse.com might have had a better week out of this, but not a lot of other
betting agencies have been struggling though. No live sports. You must feel right for them.
Well, I think Gail's been doing it tough, so Tom might have passed on a few dollars to her.
Yeah. Exactly. The whole industry, the betting industry's gone crazy over the last 10 years. An agency will pop up overnight. Yeah. The glut of money in that rubbish is ridiculous.
So, if we're to look at it, 1.8 billion that was wasted. If we had to change that policy to 1.8 billion that people could have used to put into the housing industry, which is the other stimulus that they're announcing, I think we wouldn't have wasted, let's say we wasted $1 billion. $1 billion that we could use to buy our first home is probably much better spent than where it went. But, live and learn.
Yeah, exactly. Well, moving on, we actually had a customer question in relation to this sort of period, and they're looking to open a cafe and starting with no assets and no cash. They were thinking about
Yeah,
getting a business loan. What are your thoughts on
yeah.
how would they go about getting the business loan, and do you think it's a good idea?
I wouldn't see any bank touching anyone. So if you don't have assets to back up that loan, you're going to struggle. Banks, at the best of times, banks don't let you borrow to buy businesses. So they only let you borrow to buy physical assets. You could probably go to a lower end borrower. So, I don't know. So there's sort of a tiering in the banking. So you've got your top tier, which is your top four banks. You've got your middle tiers, bankings. Then you've got your sort of the credit unions, and then you've got Joe down the road who'll give you $500, to do what you need. Lower end lenders. Oh, and that's the other thing. Then there has been a hugely rapid growth in the sort of the payday loans, which is the what's that thing where you pay for you or whatever it's called?
What do you
When
mean?
you buy at the shop and
Oh
then you
yeah,
can
yeah. After paying those, yeah, lay-by
afterpay, yeah.
companies, essentially lay-bys. Yeah,
So they are companies who are governed by less stringent reporting requirements than the banks, so they can lend money on um, a lot easier terms. So that those lower end borrowers will give you the money, but I would suggest not to do it. It's just too much of a risk to take that if you're going to walk into a business, I mean, any cafe business has probably got minimum 30 to 40, maybe even $50,000 worth of equipment that needs to be bought, and that's just on the fit out. If you don't have a decent amount of cash flow to get you through the first few months, you're sort of really rolling the dice, and it's sort of it's basically just sort of debt levels, or sort of risk levels. So, and the prime scenario would be I walk in, I have all my cash, I have $50,000 in the bank. The chances of me not not making it in that business is a lot less than if I'm coming in borrowing everything, no money to pay the bills, no money to sort of expand, no money to make mistakes. That scenario is a higher risk scenario. It's not to say it won't work. It just means you're rolling the dice a lot more, and you're rolling it with debt that you're going to have to take with you once you leave. So you close the business, it's going to be very hard to sell a bunch of fridges and freezers you've just bought for the price you've just bought them for. And a failing business, very hard to get rid of. So, and you're still also going to be tied in on the lease, which they can personally go you for. So, if that's say 15,000 a year, whether that's 70,000 a year, that is usually a 3-year term. So that first 3 years, they're going to say, we're going to go you personally to pay that back. So very risky scenario. I would advise against it. Yeah.
so is
Not much
hire
more to say on that
purchase,
one.
well, not hire purchase, just hiring equipment possible,
It is. It's
or are
still
you
the
on a
same thing.
contract?
So it's a higher purchase on equipment is still a lower term lender. So it's going through a lower tier lender. So it's going through a company who's quite willing to give you the the equipment. Interest rates are higher because of the increased risk, but you're still personally liable. And if you can't sell the fridges, freezers, and cookers, you're probably going to take a $10,000 hit on that at a minimum, plus the rental hit, which you've got to drag on. And the rental is generally the part that hurts. So you get stuck with a 3-year term on a rental that you've got to pay out, or they sue you, basically.
Okay.
So a risky business, yeah. Case by case, but that's sort of a worst case scenario where it's just everything is all risk and we'll just see what happens. So some people might be able to cope with that, but if you're if you've got 2 kids, a wife, and a mortgage, No, let's not do any of that.
Okay. Yeah, certainly planning, and then obviously it's a lot of cups of coffee initially if you're starting with nothing in the bank.
Yeah, and it's such a volatile industry. So you could be the trendiest cafe shop on the block for 3 to 6 months, and then the one down the road opens up, and they're just so much more better. They take half your business or a third of your business. That's your profit. So it's so hit and miss. It's so risky. Yeah, I don't know. I've seen a lot of businesses up and down. I've seen a lot of people try a lot of things. I see a lot more of the risk than I do the benefit these days, which is probably a better thing. But it's not to say it won't work. I personally, as a risk adverse person, would rather have a few more safeguards in place before I stepped into that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what else do you have for us, Dale?
Interest rates got announced today. So they were discussing whether we should go into negative interest rates, which means that you have to pay to have your money in the bank, which is a weird concept. So interest rates are at 0.25%, which is a quarter of a percent, which is historically low levels. In order to stimulate the economy anymore, the interest rates that they're talking about going into negative interest rates. And what that means is that anybody who holds government bonds will pretty much sell them, and then they will take that money and invest it elsewhere. And that sort of frees up that cash and pushes it through the economy. Japan have done it.
Successfully?
I think not really. So their property market's in the toilet, which I think might be half of the reason to do that. But I think it's a bit early to be going for sort of such dramatic things like that. So on the back of the government playing all their cards, we really want to see the Reserve Bank doing all that they can to sort of try and to stimulate the economy. I think we've got to give it another 6 to 12 months before they start talking about that. As a concept, I don't. Yeah, they say it works, but I just don't think it's a great thing. I don't. Yeah, I don't think that the punishing people for keeping money is a very successful strategy, and forcing people to transfer that money to investments in a highly volatile environment might create a situation where a lot of people lose. Luckily, the Reserve Bank didn't go down that path. They just sort of held back and left everything as is. I hope they do that again. But because the dollar has just been pushed up, so the dollar's now getting close to 70 cents. I think it's getting up to 68 cents. They're saying that that's going to then put pressure on inflation, which is the price of everything going up, which would mean that the Reserve Bank have to step in and start looking at negative interest rates. I hope they don't. I don't want to go down that path. I'm hoping that we see a cooling in markets, a cooling in spending that sort of absorbs that increased spending that we can get from a higher dollar.
Yeah. Let's see how we look in 3 or 4 months' time, around September, when the rate that things is changing. The government was announcing they wouldn't say tourism in 2020, and now all that's as it is. We can go to Greece. Greece are yet to come. Greeks are yet to come here, but potentially that's going to be opened up. So the way things are changing, you don't know what the place will look like in 3 months. You don't know how the economy will recover or not. And I think that's probably what everyone's sort of in a position where they think it's normal, but they're not 100% it's going to continue like that. So it's quite interesting that everyone is still looking to spend as much money as they are. The way I'm talking to people is to be conservative, but everyone's pushing back and looking to buy houses and all kinds of things.
How many people have you... Yeah, I don't see anybody who's sort of seeing things the way that people were talking at the beginning, saying this is going to be the biggest contraction in the economy since the Great Depression. You look around, I don't see the Great Depression out the door. I don't see queues. There was queues at Centrelink at the beginning, but then everyone got double their money, and now they're sort of sitting back pretty. So if this is the Great Depression of our time, we live in a truly wondrous time where we don't feel anything at the moment.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I don't know whether they got it totally wrong and just overspent it, or which is what I think it is the spending is just pushing off the drops, and things are going to come later. But nobody at the moment is feeling it. No one is worrying about it. There are a few larger properties coming on the market, so a few of the really premium properties that haven't come up for a long time. And I think that's just people looking to get out because they think it's the top of the market. But who knows? The other thing that we probably can touch on is the government is starting to play around with incentives for the building industry again. So that they're going back to that old chestnut. So $20,000 grants is what's talked about for anyone who builds a new house. There were discussions about a renovation style grant that was going to come through. That seems to have cooled off a bit. But yeah, they're looking to really stimulate house building more. Now, in an already overinflated market, it doesn't seem wise, but it's the way it is.
That 20,000.
They just keep throwing more money out.
The 20,000 will be wiped off on your property value in 3 years. Not even that.
Yeah. Oh, not even that. So if you buy a $600,000 home, it's gone in a blink of an eye.
Yeah.
So we're in really weird territory in that the level of debt to income is so far out of whack with what it has been historically and what it is in most other countries in the world, that for the government to continue to prop up the property market seems odd at times. It just seems that, why not we put some more money into tourism, or why don't we put some money into the areas that are really hurting, the live bands sort of area and the arts area. It's not as, I don't know. It just seems that the government always goes back to the same things. Property is where we're going to do it. They never seem to hit a lot of different area, a lot of different industries which are really struggling and are really doing it tough. Whereas, construction's booming at the moment. My fear is that the construction industry is going to take all this additional housing, and rather than not roll it into new developments, they're just going to keep going. So they're going to roll it into the next one. So all we've done is we've taken this money, they've developed, and then they've rolled it into another project. That really doesn't help anyone. So there needs to be a slowing down of the industry to match the slowing down of the sales. But, it's capitalist society. I can't see that happening. I can see them taking all this money and going full ball into that wall that's just been moved a little bit down the road. So, yeah, it's insane. I was speaking to a few people in the building industry today who, it's like, we're not struggling. We've got plenty of work on. Why are they tipping more money into it? It just doesn't make sense. So, yeah, crazy times. Money everywhere. Yeah, I think it's going to be, I don't know. Can we spend our way out of a depression? I think that's going to be the lesson that we learn, because they couldn't offer any more money. They couldn't spend it fast enough. So did it work? Did it not? I think time will tell.
Yeah, we'll find out soon. So what have we got on next week? We're going to move a little bit into bookkeeping and discussing that, and how starting at the grassroots of business. We've discussed a lot of government incentives and macroeconomics the last few weeks. I thought we just pivoted a bit.
So I think I would like so that the original our original sort of focus on the podcast was sort of basic buildings of businesses and the basics around growing a business. I think with the recent changes and all the public discussions we've got into the macro end of things, um, I would like to get down to that. We could look at how basic bookkeeping structures work, how how we work with business. Um, Depending on what happens, depending on what ScoMo does, he might give me a bit more content to talk about.
Yeah, it's
He
hard
might
to
he
tell.
might he might be quiet, but I think we should look to start getting back into that area and start to talk about the basic necessities of business, and then building that base of information, which I think we spoke about a fair while back, which was the whole point of this podcast, is to sort of build up the basics about how to run a business and sort of help people grow and then realize when they can break.
Sounds good. I'll speak to you soon.
All right, thanks, mate. See ya.